The new CEO fired me at 4:12 on a Friday afternoon, 72 hours before the FDA inspection that would decide whether our company's most important product could stay on the market, and the strangest part was that I warned him exactly what was coming. He smiled, slid a severance envelope across my desk, and said, "Maya, we're done paying six figures for someone whose whole department exists to tell grown adults what they can't do." I looked at the envelope, then at the red quality hold notice glowing on the monitor behind him, and asked, "You know the inspectors arrive Monday morning, right?" His smile widened. "That's what consultants are for." I remember closing my laptop and thinking that sometimes the worst mistake a person makes is not ignoring a warning. It is assuming the person giving the warning is replaceable. My name is Maya Rowan. I was 29 years old, Director of Quality and Regulatory Systems for Asteron Surgical, a medical device manufacturer outside Cincinnati that made single-use instruments for orthopedic procedures. I had worked there since I was 22, starting as a documentation specialist and working my way through supplier quality, complaint investigations, validation, corrective actions, and eventually the ugly, invisible center of the business where every shortcut somebody wanted to take eventually landed on my desk. Asteron was personal to me in a way it was not personal to Grant Vail, the 38-year-old private equity favorite who had become CEO 6 weeks earlier. My mother, Elena Rowan, had helped build the original quality system with her sister Denise when the company was still operating out of a converted warehouse with 23 employees. Mom died when I was 19, and after college I joined Asteron because I thought preserving what she had built was a way of staying close to her. Denise, my aunt, was now chair of the board and one of the company's largest individual shareholders. She had spent years telling everyone that I had my mother's instincts, right up until Grant arrived talking about efficiency ratios, headcount reduction, and breaking the culture of fear created by compliance people. On Friday morning, I had sent Grant, Denise, our plant manager, and the head of operations a 4-page risk memo about a pattern of particulate complaints connected to a new packaging seal process. It was not a disaster. We had caught it early. 3 lots were on hold. The suspected equipment was isolated, and my team had already designed the investigation. What mattered was that Monday's FDA inspection included a review of the exact validation file tied to that packaging line. I recommended that we keep the lots on hold, complete the corrective action review, and prepare a transparent timeline for the inspectors. Grant replied with 2 words: too cautious. At noon, he called an executive meeting and announced that our upcoming acquisition required leaner overhead. At 3:45, my access to the executive quality dashboard disappeared. At 4:12, he came into my office with our HR manager, Celeste, and told me my position had been eliminated. "You are eliminating the quality director 3 days before an FDA inspection?" I asked. Celeste stared at the carpet. Grant leaned against my filing cabinet like he had rehearsed the pose. "I'm eliminating a bottleneck. We hired Barris Advisory. They have former regulators on staff. They'll handle the inspection. Your team reports to operations now." I said, "Quality cannot be independent if the same people measured on output control whether product ships." Grant sighed theatrically. "This is exactly what I mean. Every conversation with you becomes a lecture." Then he tapped the severance packet. "Sign the acknowledgement, take the weekend, and move on. Asteron needs builders, not hall monitors." If you have ever been the daughter in a family who gets called difficult because you are the one who notices the problem before everyone else, you probably know the feeling that hit me then. It was not anger first. It was recognition. I had spent 7 years believing that if I documented carefully enough, worked late enough, and kept enough crises from reaching customers, the adults around me would eventually understand the value of what I did. Grant was showing me that some people only understand a bridge after they remove it and try to cross the river. I signed only the page acknowledging receipt, not the release, packed my personal photographs and notebooks, and left every company record exactly where it belonged. Before I walked out, I forwarded my Friday risk memo to the Regulated Records Archive and printed the system confirmation showing it had been received. Then I put 1 copy in the transition binder on my desk with a yellow tab that said Monday Inspection. Grant appeared in my doorway as I lifted my box. "Still trying to scare everyone?" he asked. I looked at him and said, "No. I'm making sure nobody can say they weren't warned." He laughed. "Enjoy being right from your couch." I stopped beside him, lowered my voice, and said, "Good luck Monday, Grant." Then I left. That evening I drove to my Aunt Denise's house because, despite everything, some part of me still believed she would see the firing for what it was once I explained the timing. Her home sat on a wooded ridge north of the city, the kind of place where every room looked staged for a magazine and nobody ever seemed comfortable sitting down. Denise had invited me before the firing for a small family dinner celebrating the acquisition negotiations, and for 10 minutes after I pulled into her driveway I considered turning around. Then I thought of my mother. I thought of the years Denise had told me that Elena would be proud of the way I had protected the company, and I went inside. Grant was already there. That should have told me everything. He was at the kitchen island with a glass of bourbon, telling Denise's husband and two board friends about removing obsolete layers. When I walked in, carrying nothing but my purse, the room went quiet for half a second. Grant lifted his glass. Department of No. Denise gave him a look that was not quite disapproval and not quite amusement, then led me toward the breakfast room. "Maya, sweetheart, I know you're hurt." I said, "I'm not here about hurt. I'm here because Monday's inspection is tied directly to the seal validation investigation. Grant fired me after I put 3 lots on hold and moved quality under operations. That is a governance problem." Denise sat down slowly and folded her hands. "Grant has told me your concerns. Then you know what I recommended. I know you recommended delaying shipments during the most sensitive quarter we've ever had." That sentence changed the temperature in my body. "The product is on hold because we have complaints we have not explained yet. And Barris believes the complaint rate is statistically insignificant. Barris has been here 9 days. Denise's mouth tightened. "You see, this is what Grant is talking about. You always make yourself the only person capable of understanding the issue." I stared at her. "I wrote the issue down. Every detail is in the system. This isn't about me being special." "Then why are you acting like the company can't function without you?" she asked. I almost laughed. "I'm not. I'm telling you it can function without me if the people left behind respect the system. Grant does not." Denise leaned back and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Your mother could be rigid too." I went completely still. She had never used Mom against me before. "What does that mean?" I asked. Denise looked past me toward the kitchen, where Grant was laughing. "It means Elena sometimes forgot that businesses have to move. You inherited her instinct to protect. That is admirable. But Grant was hired to grow. We are weeks from a transaction that could change all of our lives. I need you not to turn this into a family war because you lost a title," I said. "This is not about my title." She gave me a soft, tired smile that somehow hurt worse than Grant's arrogance. "It always feels bigger when it happens to us." At that moment, I understood that Grant had not blindsided Denise. She had approved the restructure. Maybe not every detail, but enough. The woman who had spent years telling me I was the custodian of my mother's legacy had decided the legacy was worth less than closing a deal. Grant wandered into the breakfast room and leaned against the doorway. "Everything okay?" Denise said, "We're fine." He looked at me. "Maya's smart. She'll land somewhere." I asked him, "Did you release the 3 held lots?" His expression flickered, just once. Operations reviewed the data. That wasn't my question. "We're not discussing company decisions with a former employee." I stood up. "Then don't." Denise rose too. "Maya, please don't leave like this." I looked at my aunt and said, "You keep saying I'm making this personal. You're right. I stayed 7 years because this place was personal." That ended at 4:12 today. I went home, turned off my phone, and sat in the dark until almost midnight. Then one message got through on my personal email. It was from Rose Hanley, the woman who had hired me at 22 and trained me to investigate problems without falling in love with my first theory. Rose had retired from Asteron 2 years earlier, after 35 years in medical device quality. Her message said only, "Heard what happened. Before you sign anything, Call me. I called. She listened without interrupting while I described the severance packet, the inspection, the held lots, and Denise's reaction. When I finished, Rose was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "First, do not touch anything that belongs to Asteron. No customer lists, no files, no screenshots, nothing. Your reputation is worth more than revenge. Second, read your employment agreement. Read the change in control amendment from last year. I found it in my personal records. Asteron had required senior employees to sign retention amendments when the board began exploring a sale. Mine guaranteed a retention payment if I remained through closing, but it also said that if I was terminated without cause during the transaction window, the payment accelerated and several post-employment restrictions narrowed dramatically. I read the paragraph twice. "Rose," I said, "does this mean what I think it means?" "It means you need a real employment lawyer to confirm it Monday," she said. "It also means Grant may have paid you to leave." I sat there staring at the paper. For the first time that day, something inside me loosened. Rose continued, "And there is something else. 3 companies have called me in the last year asking whether you would ever leave Asteron. I always told them no because you were loyal to your mother's memory. You are not trapped, Maya. Do you understand me? You are unemployed. You are not worthless." That distinction changed everything. I slept 4 hours. By Sunday afternoon, I had updated my resume, organized my personal certifications, and written down exactly what I wanted from my next chapter. I did not want another title inside someone else's hierarchy. I wanted control over the kind of work I accepted. I registered the domain for Rowan Quality Strategies, not because I had clients yet, but because after 7 years of protecting somebody else's company, I wanted to see my own name on the door of whatever came next. Monday morning at Asteron began without me, but by 8:37 I knew exactly how badly it was going. I was sitting across from an employment attorney named Laura Chen in a small downtown office when Rose texted, "FDA is in. 2 investigators. One is Patel." My stomach dropped. Dr. Nikhil Patel had inspected Asteron 4 years earlier. He was calm, meticulous, and famous for asking the same question 5 different ways until he understood whether a system was real or merely documented. Laura was reviewing my change in control agreement while I tried not to look at my phone every 10 seconds. At 8:51, Rose texted again. They asked for packaging validation history first. At 9:05, Grant put Barra's consultant in room. At 9:19, "They can't explain why Revision 6 exists." I closed my eyes. Revision 6 existed because the line had failed a humidity challenge 9 months earlier, forcing us to change dwell time parameters and add a secondary verification step. The reason mattered. If someone showed Patel the revision without understanding the failure that created it, he would keep digging. At 9:44, my former deputy, Tessa, called from her personal phone. I almost did not answer because I did not want to interfere. When I did, she whispered, "I'm not asking you for company information. I just need you to know they released the lot Saturday." I sat up. "Who authorized it?" "Operations." Barris signed off on a memo saying the complaint trend was inconclusive. "Did quality approve?" "There is no quality director." Grant told Mark to sign as interim. Mark Ellis was the plant operations manager. A good manufacturing guy, but absolutely not independent from the shipments that determined his monthly bonus. "Tessa, do not do anything for me," I said. "Do your job. Tell the truth. Follow your procedures." Her voice shook. "Maya, Patel just asked why your risk memo says the lots should remain on hold until particulate identification is complete, but Saturday's disposition says there was no material risk." I felt cold. Because there was no new evidence between Friday and Saturday. She went silent. "That's what I thought." We hung up. Laura closed the agreement and looked at me. "Your former employer did you a favor." I barely heard her. "What?" "The non-solicitation section still applies to employees and customers you personally handled during the last 12 months, but because they terminated you without cause during the transaction window, the broader industry restriction does not. You can consult. You can work for competitors. You can start your own firm. You simply cannot take confidential information or actively solicit protected accounts. Also, your retention payment is due within 30 days. I stared at her. They fired me to save money. Laura smiled faintly. They did not save money. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, the same number called. I answered. A woman said, "Is this Maya Rowan? My name is Caroline Beck. I'm general counsel for Helix Cardio. Rose Hanley gave me your number. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." I almost laughed. It's an interesting time. Helix was a growing cardiac monitor company in Indianapolis, preparing for a major quality system overhaul before expanding production. Caroline said their vice president of quality had resigned unexpectedly, and they needed an outside advisor for 12 weeks. "Rose says you are unusually good at building systems that people can actually use," she said. "Would you be willing to meet tomorrow?" I looked at Laura. She nodded. I said yes. At 11:32, Tessa sent one final text. Inspection expanded to Kappa, management controls and product disposition. Acquisition team just arrived. Then she stopped messaging. That was good. She needed to protect herself. By noon, I knew the failure at Asteron was no longer about the packaging line. The investigators had found a deeper contradiction. On Friday, the company's quality system said unresolved evidence required caution. On Saturday, leadership overrode that conclusion without new evidence. On Monday, the same leadership could not explain the decision. The danger was not that one employee had left. The danger was that Grant had demonstrated, in less than 72 hours, that the system existed only when it agreed with him. At 3:17 that afternoon, an industry trade site reported that Asteron's pending acquisition had been delayed while the buyer evaluated recent regulatory developments. It did not say more. It did not need to. My phone began lighting up with former coworkers, vendors, recruiters, and people I had not heard from in years. I answered almost none of them. Then Denise called. I watched her name flash until voicemail picked up. She called again and again. On the fourth call, I answered. She did not say hello. "Maya, we need you in the building." "No." The silence on her end lasted 3 full seconds. "This is not the time for pride." I agree. The inspectors want to understand the history of the packaging investigation. The history is in the electronic quality system and in the transition binder on my desk. Grant says some of the context was only in your head. Grant said Friday that consultants could replace me. Denise exhaled sharply. "Please don't do this." "Do what?" "Make us suffer to prove a point." My voice stayed calm. "I am not making you suffer. I am sitting in a lawyer's office 40 miles away. I have not called a customer, touched a file, or spoken to an inspector. Every consequence in that building was created by decisions made after you fired me." Denise's voice softened. "Your mother would not want Asteron damaged." I closed my eyes. There it was again. "Do not use her like that," I said. "Friday, when I warned you about the inspection, you told me I was confusing my title with the company's survival. Today you are asking me to save the company because you suddenly believe I mattered. You do not get to change the story depending on what you need from me." She said, "Then tell me what it takes." I looked through the window at the courthouse across the street and realized something important. Friday night, I would have given anything to hear those words. Monday afternoon, they meant almost nothing. "It takes you solving the problem without putting me back inside it," I said, and ended the call. By Wednesday, the inspection had not shut Asteron down, the stock had not collapsed, and no federal agent had marched anyone out in handcuffs. Reality was less theatrical and, in some ways, more brutal. The FDA investigators issued a list of observations requiring formal response. The acquisition buyer suspended closing. 2 major hospital distributors paused new orders on the affected product family, and the board formed a special committee to review management's decisions during the 72 hours before the inspection. Grant still had his office. He simply no longer had control of the narrative. That same Wednesday, I met Helix Cardio in a borrowed conference room at a co-working building. I expected 4 people. 9 showed up. Their chief operating officer, Regulatory director, engineering lead, and head of manufacturing spent 2 hours asking me how I would redesign their quality system without turning it into a bureaucracy. I told them exactly what Grant had never understood. A good quality system should make the right decision easier, not slower. If every control feels like paperwork, either the control is poorly designed or leadership does not understand the risk it manages. By the end of the meeting, they offered Rowan Quality Strategies a 12-week engagement worth more than I had earned in 6 months at Asteron. I did not celebrate until I was alone in my car. Then I put both hands on the steering wheel and cried so hard I had to wait 20 minutes before driving home. It was not because of the money. It was because the thing Grant had treated as dead weight had value in a room where nobody knew my mother, nobody owed me loyalty, and nobody cared about my family name. They wanted my judgment. That Friday, exactly 1 week after my firing, Denise and Grant came to my apartment without calling. I saw them through the peephole and almost let them stand there, but I opened the door because I wanted to know whether either of them had learned anything. Denise looked 10 years older. Grant looked furious. Not humbled. Furious. He walked in before I invited him and said, "You need to stop talking to people in the industry." I shut the door. "I am not talking about Asteron. You signed restrictions. My attorney disagrees." "Your attorney is wrong." "Then have Asteron's attorney contact her." Denise said, "Grant, stop." He turned on her. "She is using this to build a consulting company while we are under review." I stared at him. "I am using my resume." He pointed at me. "Do you think Helix called you by accident? Everyone knows what happened Monday." I did not tell them. "It doesn't matter. You are profiting from our crisis." That was the moment I finally understood why Grant had been so dangerous. He did not see decisions as connected to outcomes. He saw outcomes as things done to him by disloyal people. I said, "You fired me on Friday because you believed my work had no value. Now another company is paying for that work, and somehow that is also my fault." Denise stepped between us. "Maya, the board wants you to attend a special meeting Monday. Outside counsel is reviewing the timeline, and your Friday memo is central. I'll answer factual questions through counsel." Grant laughed bitterly. "Of course. Build your case." I looked at him. "There is no case to build. The system built it for me." His face changed. "What does that mean?" My risk memo was archived at 10:06 Friday morning. The product hold was entered at 10:19. You received both. The lots were released Saturday under an operations authorization. The system logs who approved each step. You keep talking like I set a trap. "Grant, I was trying to prevent the trap." Denise covered her mouth with one hand. Grant said nothing. I opened the door. "I have a client call in 20 minutes. Denise whispered, "Maya, if the board removes him, will you come back?" Grant turned toward her so fast it was almost funny. I looked at my aunt. "No." She blinked. "You don't have to answer now." "I already know." Her eyes filled. "This was your mother's company too. That is why I stayed too long. The words hurt to say, but once they were out, they were clean. Mom taught me to protect patients and tell the truth when the truth is inconvenient. She did not teach me to sacrifice myself to a building. If Asteron deserves to survive, it will survive by fixing what is wrong, not by dragging me back to hide what happened." Denise nodded once, slowly. Grant muttered, "You think you won." I met his eyes. "No, I think I left." There was a difference, and for the first time in my life, I did not need anyone in that doorway to understand it. The special board meeting took place the following Monday, 10 days after my firing, in the same glass conference room where Grant had introduced his lean transformation plan 6 weeks earlier. I attended by video from Laura's office because I did not want the symbolism of walking back into a Asteron to become more important than the facts. Outside counsel asked me to walk through the timeline. I did. Friday, 10:06 a.m. Risk memo archived. Friday, 10:19. 3 lots placed on quality hold. Friday, 12:40. Executive meeting where Grant challenged the hold. Friday, 3:47. My system permissions changed. Friday, 4:12. Termination. Friday, 4:38. Transition binder completed and records confirmation generated. Saturday, 11:14. Operations released the lots after a consultant memo stated that the complaint signal was inconclusive. Monday, FDA requested the validation history and identified the conflicting dispositions. I did not call Grant reckless. I did not call Denise disloyal. I did not say I had warned them 100 times. I simply answered questions and let timestamps do what emotion never could. Then outside counsel displayed an email I had never seen. It was from Celeste in HR to Grant and Denise at 2:03 Friday afternoon. Celeste had written that terminating the quality director immediately before a scheduled inspection created unnecessary operational and governance risk and recommended delaying any restructuring until after the inspection. Grant replied 7 minutes later, "The whole point is to show the company nobody is untouchable." Denise had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I watched my aunt stare at the screen. Grant began explaining that the message had been taken out of context. One of the independent directors interrupted him. "What context makes that sentence acceptable?" Grant said. "Maya had created a culture where people were afraid to make decisions without her." I answered before anyone asked me. "That is not true." He turned toward the camera. "You don't get to speak unless counsel asks you." The board chair said, "She absolutely does." Grant's face reddened. "This is exactly the problem. She has turned everyone against me." Laura touched my arm, warning me not to get pulled into it. I stayed quiet. The special committee then presented interviews from supervisors who said Grant had repeatedly encouraged them to treat quality controls as negotiable if shipments were at risk. A consultant from Barris clarified that their Saturday memo had never authorized product release. It had only recommended additional testing. Mark, the operations manager, admitted that Grant had pressured him to sign the disposition because the buyer's diligence team was monitoring quarterly shipments. The story Grant had been telling himself collapsed piece by piece, not because I attacked him, but because every person he had treated as a prop finally had a record. The board placed him on administrative leave that afternoon. 2 days later, he resigned. Denise stepped down as chair but remained a director while the company recruited an independent chief executive and chief quality officer. The acquisition did not close that quarter. Asteron spent months remediating the inspection observations, revalidating the packaging process, retraining management, and rebuilding distributor confidence. I heard all of this from public filings and former coworkers who became friends once I was no longer their boss. I never returned as an employee. When Denise finally called 3 weeks later, she did something she had not done on Friday. She apologized without explaining herself. "I chose the transaction over you," she said. "And worse, I chose it over the truth you were trying to tell me." I did not tell her everything was okay. It was not. I said, "Thank you for saying that." She asked if we could have dinner someday without discussing Asteron. I told her, maybe. It was not forgiveness, but it was a boundary with a door in it instead of a wall. That was enough. 6 months later, Rowan Quality Strategies occupied 3 rooms in a renovated brick building near the river. We had 8 clients, 2 full-time employees, and more work than I could responsibly accept. Rose came in twice a month as a senior advisor and refused to let anyone call her retired. Tessa left Asteron on good terms after helping complete the remediation and joined me as my first quality systems manager. Helix Cardio extended our original 12-week engagement into a year-long contract, and the system we built with them passed its next inspection with only minor housekeeping comments. I kept the yellow Monday inspection tab from my old transition binder in a frame on my office shelf, not because I wanted to remember Grant, but because I wanted to remember the version of myself who had walked out on Friday believing she had lost everything. One rainy afternoon in November, Denise came by my office for the first time. She stood in the doorway looking at the whiteboard covered with project timelines and said, "Your mother would have loved this place. 6 months earlier, that sentence would have undone me." This time I smiled and said, "I think she would have loved that I built it my way." Denise nodded. On her way out, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a copy of an old photograph I had never seen. My mother was 28. almost exactly my age, standing in Asteron's first warehouse beside a folding table covered in binders. On the back, in her handwriting, she had written, "Systems matter because people forget. Write down the truth." I sat there for a long time after Denise left. Grant had called my work expensive paperwork. Denise had called me rigid. For years, I had treated those words like accusations I had to disprove. The photograph made me realize my mistake. I had never needed to convince people like Grant that the work mattered. Reality would always handle that eventually. My responsibility was simpler: know what I was worth, do the work well, and refuse to let someone else's failure of imagination become my ceiling. Asteron recovered. It did not burn to the ground, and I am glad it did not, because hundreds of good people worked there, and patients depended on what they made. Grant lost a job, not his life. Denise lost a chairmanship and some certainty. I lost a company I had mistaken for a family inheritance. What I gained was harder to quantify. I stopped believing loyalty required me to remain where my judgment was tolerated only when it was convenient. I stopped waiting for a title to prove I had authority. And I stopped confusing being needed with being valued. The strangest part is that people still ask whether I regret not going back when the board offered me the chance. I never need time to answer. They finally understood what I had been holding together. But by the time they did, I had already built something that did not require me to disappear inside it.